Hello and welcome. CTV National starts right now. The U.S. president weighs in and makes waves.
I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a liberal.
It's true. I'm a tough guy to deal with.
Is the endorsement a blessing or a curse in the coming race for Parliament?
Hearing that they're already gone is wonderful.
Plus, Tesla forced to navigate new roadblocks and a fiery backlash.
If you follow me, they are going to fall madly in love with you.
And broken hearts, shattered promises, surviving a so-called sex cult.
CTV National News with Sandy Renault.
I'm Todd Vanderheyden. Sandy is off today. Canada's politicians are reacting to Donald Trump's latest remarks about Canada. In an interview with Fox News, the U.S. president said he thinks dealing with a Liberal prime minister will be easier and that the Conservative leader is no friend of his. CTV's Judy Trinh with Trump weighing in on Canadian politics ahead, Judy, of a likely election.
Todd, with a snap election looming, observers say this is an endorsement no candidate wants.
With Canada and the U.S. locked in a trade war, Donald Trump weighed in on who he wants to negotiate with.
The Conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. So when he says negative things, I couldn't care less. I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a liberal.
There was no response from the Prime Minister's office. Mark Carney spent most of the day in closed-door meetings, but his Conservative opponent addressed it within the opening minutes of his news conference in Sudbury.
It's clear that President Trump wants the Liberals in power because they will keep this country weak.
Some analysts say Trump's comments will help Pierre Poilievre fight back against Liberal attack ads like this one.
Everything is broken.
Everything is broken.
The Liberal campaign is looking to make any link they can between Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trump, as are a number of third-party organizations right now. And this undermines all of that.
Since this November meeting in Mar-a-Lago, Trump has been talking about turning Canada into the 51st state. Before launching a trade war earlier this month, Trump spoke about using economic force against Canada. Although Canadian politicians have talked about toning down the rhetoric over tariffs, Trump is not doing the same.
They give us nothing, and they are the worst people to negotiate with.
Canada has retaliated against Trump's 25% tariffs, but the White House is expected to put more protectionist measures in within weeks.
It doesn't matter who's sitting in the Prime Minister's office up in Ottawa. The Trump administration is still going to have complaints about the United States' trade relationship with Canada being unbalanced from their perspective.
Now, since being sworn in last Friday, Prime Minister Carney has traveled overseas to meet with the leaders of France and Britain, but has yet to speak with the American president. According to several polls, Todd, the top issue in this election is dealing with Donald Trump.
Interesting. Judy Trinh in Ottawa. Thanks, Judy. Well, the tariff war and the change of leader appears to be helping the Liberals. In December, they were 30 points behind the Conservatives closely, but some pollsters now have them in the lead. Check this out. New numbers from Leger and Angus Reid both have the Liberals at 42% and the Conservatives somewhere between 37 and 39%. But the latest Nanos figures do show a tighter race, with the Conservatives at 35%, the Liberals at 34%, and the NDP at 16%. With Trump's ongoing trade war, many Canadians are choosing to buy Canadian, including alcohol products. But for restaurant owners, doing the same is hard because of internal trade barriers. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth is standing by with more on the barriers, Paul, at the bar.
Todd, with the push to buy local and buy Canadian, some bar and restaurant owners say they are bumping into barriers that are causing inefficiencies.
Alcohol is often the poster child for internal trade dysfunction in this country.
Finding improvements for interprovincial trade was the focus at this panel discussion in Halifax.
I can't say how many times I've heard it's easier for me to access Alabama than Alberta.
Vineyard General Manager Will Roman says the sale of alcohol in Canada is inefficient and limiting profitability.
I'm not set up for success because of that.
Wineries like this one in Lincoln, Ontario are not allowed to deal directly with most bars and restaurants in other provinces. They must first sell to the local provincial government-run distributor. In Nova Scotia, government rules require all booze to flow through the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation before being sold.
They cannot contact us directly and be like, hey, Rosewood, we want to order this product at this amount of cases.
Roman also can't offer bars and restaurants a cheaper deal.
If we were able to get that easier at a more affordable price that we could introduce our guests to, then that would be a win for everyone.
Bar owner Jeff Van Horn believes removing some of these trade barriers could help his bottom line and offer support for small businesses across the country.
We wouldn't be serving our community if we weren't serving products that are local and support the Canadian economy.
Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston says he's working on a solution as provinces struggle through some of the same hurdles in the U.S.-Canada trade war.
Free trade in Canada. It's one country. We should trade freely within our country.
Selling first to the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation instead of directly to small businesses can also cause delivery delays. Some products can take up to several months to arrive. Todd.
CTV's Paul Hollingsworth in Dartmouth. Thanks, Paul. The Vancouver Auto Show kicked off today, but without Tesla. Organizers removing it over safety concerns as public anger against Tesla CEO and Trump advisor Elon Musk was also very much on display in Montreal.
There was a 911 call that was made for vandalism that was committed to the front of a car dealer.
2 suspects have been arrested after this dealership was splashed with paint. There have been violent attacks on Tesla dealerships in the U.S. and Europe over Musk's strong support of Donald Trump. Meantime, a few weeks back, CTV News reported on a suspicious spike in Tesla sales in Canada ahead of the deadline for a federal EV rebate program. So, could Ottawa have paid more than $40 million in questionable rebates to the company? CTV's Adrian Gobriel has been investigating the latest developments on Tesla. Adrian.
Todd, it's a puzzling story. Back in January, when Transport Canada announced that it was pausing its EV rebate program, a handful of Tesla locations in Canada reported selling 8,600 vehicles, amounting to $43 million in government rebates in a single weekend. Sparking concern, did the U.S.-based auto giant exploit the system?
It's unclear why this random parking lot in Laval, Quebec has row upon row of brand new Teslas sitting there parked. In Toronto, we found a similar scene at the parking lot of an abandoned strip mall across the street from a Tesla location.
All suggest a very unusual level of activity.
On Friday, January 10th, car dealerships across the country received this email from Transport Canada saying due to the high uptake, the IZEV program will be paused in a few weeks. That weekend, Tesla filed thousands of car sales, claiming tens of millions in federal rebates. 3 days later, on Monday, the program was paused.
It is very tough to put small businesses in these situations.
This car dealership owner, not associated with Tesla, asked we hide his identity. His independent dealership is one of more than 200 across Canada who say they're now out of pocket $10 million because they didn't have time to process their EV sales before the government closed the program.
We were completely devastated. In my case, we're talking over $400,000 loss is a huge impact.
The IZEV program had dealers front the rebate to consumers on the promise the government would repay each dealership.
Questions have to be answered. Was the integrity of the program respected? Was Tesla tipped off? Was there a gaming of the system?
Earlier this month, CTV News paid this Toronto area Tesla location a visit.
Are you able to tell me when you
Can't say anything.
You can't say anything at all? When you process a rebate, is that when the car's picked up?
Can't say anything.
Or when the car's purchased online?
No comment.
Multiple emails to Tesla have gone unanswered. CTV News asked Transport Canada if Tesla has already been paid $43 million in taxpayer-funded rebates. That question has yet to be answered.
As for the $10 million independent dealerships say they're owed, Transport Canada says they're examining all possible options. Todd.
Adrian Gobriel reporting. Thanks, Adrian. Global Affairs Canada is confirming an unspecified number of Canadians were executed in China earlier this year. CTV's Rachel Aiello is in Ottawa, and Rachel, Canada is condemning what China has done here.
Todd, Global Affairs confirmed today they are aware of Canadians being executed in China earlier this year. And while officials are calling the news concerning, very few details beyond that have been released. No names have been made public, and it remains unclear how many Canadians were killed or exactly when. In a statement, Global Affairs said Canada strongly condemns China's use of the death penalty, adding that Canada repeatedly called for clemency for these individuals at the senior-most levels. The department said Canadian officials are providing consular assistance to the victims' families.
Execution of Westerners in China is rare. The last such known case, publicly known case, was more than 10 years ago. While China executes more people than any other country in the world, it is rare for them to do this with foreigners. So this is a deeply troubling development.
China's embassy in Ottawa also confirmed the executions, indicating they were connected to alleged drug crimes. In a statement, the embassy said the facts of the crimes committed by Canadian nationals in these cases were clear and the evidence is solid and sufficient, and said Chinese judicial authorities handled the cases in strict accordance with the law and fully guaranteed the rights and interests of the Canadian nationals concerned.
It's concerning. I've just not seen the news report.
While we're still seeking more information about the executions, the Canadian government has confirmed Robert Schellenberg from Abbotsford, BC, who was sentenced to death by a Chinese court in 2019 for drug smuggling, was not one of them. Todd?
Thanks, Rachel. Donald Trump says his plans for peace in Ukraine are well on track after a call with the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky today. That call coming a day after Trump spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin. CTV's Joy Malbon is standing by in Washington. And Joy, we know a few weeks ago, Trump and Zelensky had that ugly showdown in the Oval Office. What do we know about today's call?
Yeah, what a difference a few weeks makes after that dust-up in the Oval Office when Zelensky was pretty much kicked out of the White House. Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social that they had, quote, a very good telephone call with Zelensky. And he said that they're very much on track to get Russia and Kyiv on the same page towards a peace deal. Now, Zelensky, too, called their conversation positive, agreeing that a temporary ceasefire on energy infrastructure, even though the fighting continued overnight, hitting a power system. Even though all of that happened, here's what the White House had to say about that call.
President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
And Joy, what have we heard about Vladimir Putin's demands in these ongoing negotiations? What do we know?
Look, Todd, Putin did not come anywhere near to agreeing to a broad ceasefire, even a temporary ceasefire. And there's a lot of discrepancy on the Trump readout and the Kremlin's readout. The White House was asked about that today, but couldn't really explain. Russia is also not backing down on its demands that all Western military weapons and intelligence sharing to Ukraine be cut off. The Kremlin kind of seems content to wait it out. And as far as Russia's desire to come in from the cold and start up those NHL hockey games, well, here's an update.
And when it comes to the topic of hockey, it did come up. However, we're more interested in securing a peace deal than scheduling hockey games right now.
Todd, it's not clear when this mini ceasefire will take hold, but Washington is sending a negotiating team to Saudi Arabia. President Trump is determined to get a peace deal one way or another. Todd?
Our Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbon. Thanks, Joy. The Israeli military says new targeted ground activities have begun inside of Gaza, angering many families of Israeli hostages. Protesters clashed with police today in Jerusalem over Israel's decision to resume the war. As part of the new ground operation, Israel released footage today of troops on patrol. It comes a day after airstrikes killed 400 people, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. And the United States has launched more airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen. U.S. military footage shows various targets being hit last night. Houthi media reporting 10 airstrikes. It comes after Houthi attacks against Western vessels in the Red Sea in response to the war in Gaza. Coming up, sights were set on a Toronto jewelry store.
They're masked up. They're looking to do something.
That is until police crash the party. Police have released helicopter footage of a brazen robbery attempt and a dramatic takedown in Toronto.
They're masked up. They're looking to do something.
You can see an undercover police truck crashing into a vehicle, then cruisers converge and the officers execute the takedown. Police were tracking a stolen vehicle which led them to multiple suspects wielding sledgehammers, allegedly trying to break in to a Toronto jewelry store. Well, they are landmark properties in cities right across our country, with Hudson's Bay facing possible liquidation. The question is, what happens to all that prime real estate? CTV's Heather Wright is live outside the courthouse in Toronto with more. Let's start with the Bay, and what do we know here in terms of the chain and the future, Heather?
Well, Todd, we know that the judge has granted yet another extension to the Bay and other stakeholders, so giving them essentially more time to figure out how to move forward. As we know, the Bay has asked to liquidate all of its stores as it deals with this huge financial crunch. But as you mentioned, Todd, those stores, those buildings right across the country are really at the center of this fight, as well as the Bay owns a lot of these properties, but also owes landlords roughly $1 billion. And so those are some of the issues that are being ironed out now. The judge giving Bay again another extension, saying that the company does have enough liquidity to meet payroll on Friday and to stay open until at least Friday, when he hopes all sides will come back with a plan in terms of how to move forward.
Yeah, and what about the actual real estate? Because as you know, some of those stores are beautiful, Heather.
Beautiful and in prime downtown locations. I mean, we were at the Bay store here in Toronto a little while ago. It's in this iconic building, and so it's not clear what might be in some of these buildings going forward, but retail experts we spoke with said they will find a new life regardless of what's inside. Here's what one person had to say.
We don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but what doesn't change is that they're great buildings in great locations with incredible heritage, and certainly someone will be able to find a home for them in terms of repurposing them, condos, lofts, other businesses, other retailers maybe too.
And so the Bay working still with other stakeholders, trying to figure out how it can move forward. The Bay asking for liquidation. A judge has yet to approve that. They are expected to be back in court, though, on Friday.
All right.
Todd.
CTV's Heather Wright in Toronto. Thanks, Heather. Still ahead for us, sharing their heartbreaking stories, the trauma of time spent in a sex cult. That's next. All this week on CTV National, W5 is revealing new details of an investigation into a community called Twin Flames Universe, founded by Canadian Shalia Devine and her husband Jeff Devine. Former members are speaking out. They call it a sex cult. They accuse the founders of selling the false hope of true love for a very heavy price. Listen to this.
Some people are matched with complete strangers, people they'd never spoken to. There was a man, 100% like gay, matched with a cisgendered woman, and had to work through that block.
How is this not a sex cult now if he's forcing partners?
And W5's Avery Haynes is here with me in studio. This is so absurd, and I'm curious, how do they have so much power, the control over these people?
Well, these former followers will talk about coercive control, and that this is not something that just happens overnight. This is years in this community where you've given your whole life over to this community. So they say that there's a pressure to quit your jobs, volunteer, pay money to become a coach. So now all your financial well-being is within this community. Isolate yourself from friends and family who aren't part of the community. And all of this is with the promise from Jeff and Shalia Devine that if you follow them, if you buy their courses, they will find you your true flame, your true love, your twin flame. And so what you were hearing from those two former followers is this pairing up. And what they're alleging is that Jeff Devine and Shalia Devine claimed they were getting direct messages from God about who the twin flames were, and that they were all within the group, within this spiritual group, and started just matching them up.
And there's also this mirror exercise, just quickly.
So the whole foundation rests on the mirror exercise, which essentially says that everything that happens to you is your fault. You need to figure out a way to heal it. And of course, you have to buy the courses to heal that. And what they say is that this is used in a form of coercive control with stopping people from having sort of really thinking about the things that they're being asked to do.
Thanks for this, Avery.
Thank you.
And you can watch Avery's 2-hour special called We're Not a Cult Inside Twin Flames Universe this Saturday at 7 o'clock on CTV. CTV National is back in a moment. Stay with us. A stunning comeback story now. Proof you should never judge a blob by its cover. Once dubbed the world's ugliest animal, the blobfish has now been crowned as New Zealand's Fish of the Year. The competition is held by a non-profit conservation group to raise awareness of the country's fragile ecosystem, which, yes, includes this beautiful blob. And to a tiny village in Saskatchewan now, population less than 350, making a name for itself on the national stage. The Debden Roadrunners is a girls' broomball team. CTV's Alison Bamford went to the team's practice. And Alison, what makes this team so special?
Todd, dynasties like these usually come from Ontario or Quebec, where the sport is much bigger. But broomball has been huge in Debden for the last 50 years, and they're finally starting to see success at the juvenile girls level. The final drills of the season for these national champions, hoping to defend their title.
We used to be the little Debden team that nobody knew, and now we're kind of a big deal in Little Saskatchewan.
The Debden Roadrunners are one of the country's very best in broomball. They've won 3 straight juvenile titles.
It's always exciting every time, every year.
The sport is deeply rooted in the village of 327 people.
With all of our parents doing it, it's just kind of tradition.
Passed down generation to generation over the decades.
Lots of the girls that are playing now, their parents played in the 80s or 90s when they were teenagers themselves.
Broomball mirrors hockey, but with brooms instead of sticks and shoes instead of skates. There's also contact.
I just really like that aspect of it. You got to play rough and be really aggressive.
Feisty in their fight to be the best, even with the cards stacked against them. The team practices here just 4 months of the year, a shorter season than their competition since the natural ice depends on the weather.
So we have to wait a little longer before we can get on the ice.
But once they do, the team just clicks, playing for themselves, each other, and an entire community behind them.
To be a part of something that big is just so beyond exciting for me.
The national competition seems to get stronger each year, and now that the rest of the country knows that Debden is the team to beat, the Roadrunners say this four-peat won't come easy. Todd?
Alison Bamford, thanks for this, Alison. And that is our newscast on this Wednesday. I'm Todd Vander Hayden. I'll see you again right here tomorrow. Your local CTV News is coming up next.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.